as a company, what does good look like for us going forward? And you have to purposely ignore what's worked so far, even if it's been good.
Treat it as a little bit of a revolution as opposed to just a slight evolution, because I think going from start to build deserves that. It deserves a different mindset.
Welcome to Start, Build, Scale podcast by Notion Capital. This is the People and Organization edition. You're a founder shaping your startup's business or a startup leader looking to understand the intricacies of scaling startup. This episode offers not just insight, but very tangible how-tos that you can apply to your own startup. If you want to stay tuned for more insights on how to grow your business across the Start, Build, Scale journey, sign up to our Notions newsletter in the link below. Hi, I'm Juby, and today's episode, we're focusing on startups' transition from the start to build stage and the evolution of recruitment and hiring strategy as part of this journey. During the start stage, product market fit is the focus for startups. Moving into the build stage, the focus changes from product market fit to go-to-market fit and growing revenue from 3 to 30 million. To achieve these, startups need to make a step change as an organization, moving from creative chaos to a more structured and systematized ways of working. And repeatability is the foundation for a high-performing organization in the build stage. This is the People and Organization edition of the Start, Build, Scale podcast, which means we focus on how you can ensure consistency and repeatability in people decisions when it comes to who to hire, who to recognize, who to progress. Today, we will be starting with recruitment and exploring the challenges and opportunities when startup move from start to build stage. And we are joined by our guest, Jarrad Kabral, sharing his perspective as a business leader, and Ed Ross, who will be sharing his experience as a HR leader. Jarrad, can I ask you to introduce yourself to our audience, please? What do you do? What are some of your past experience with start to build stage? And what is your favorite pastime when you're not building or, busy growing startups?
Thanks, Juby. So I'm Jarrad, Australian-born, UK-based engineering leader. For the past 20 years, I've worked in a variety of different sectors, different sized companies, all the way from 30-person startups to 140,000 people enterprises. Worked in retail, in entertainment, in B2B products, in affiliate marketing, content, marketplaces. So lots of different things over my time in the tech world. My last few significant roles were I was VP engineering at Infogrid. So Infogrid is a commercial real estate carbon reduction play using IoT devices. Very, very interesting, but I no longer work there. Before that, I was global head of engineering at iTech Media. So that's iTech, they're an affiliate marketing company for the gaming sector, and they have engineering and product teams all over the world. So I ran that. And then before that, I was the first head of engineering at Zoopla before they were bought out by Silver Lake. And then during and then after as well, which was a very interesting ride. That's probably a tale for another time. What was the other question? Oh, what I like to do? I like to play music badly. So no one else gets to listen to it, but I have to listen to it. I like to travel. I'm a big foodie. I love dining out, eating new food, new restaurants, and just generally hanging out with food as the centerpiece for most things. So that's kind of me.
I have to admit, there's only one food that we hang out together, and that is laksa.
It is one of my favorite foods. It is the background on my phone, which is something I find a bit weird. I am a bit obsessed with laksa, yes.
Ed, any preference for food?
I almost all food. I'm big. You and I have had Malaysian together, Juby, and you introduced me to a few dishes which I need to eat more of.
Trying to get everyone to eat Malaysian food.
Yes, it's working.
Excellent. That's how you get the culture going. And similarly, Ed, what do you do? What is your past experience with Start, Build, Scale stage? And what is your favorite pastime when you're not busy growing startups?
Thanks, Juby. So yeah, I'm Ed. I have a long background of hiring. So I went through the usual agency world and set my own agency up initially to service the finance world, but found my sweet spot in hiring for startup, scale-up tech companies. So the kind of people that wanted problem-solving computer science engineers, and worked for a lot of companies like Amazon and all of those wonderful companies that wanted Amazon engineers over the last sort of 15 years. I sort of accidentally ended up working for one of my clients, which was Skyscanner. It was meant to be temporary. I completely fell in love with solving problems internally. They're a fantastic culture and brilliant company to work for. So I was there for about 3 years, and then decided they were good enough without me, and went off to find some other problems to solve. I met you both at Infogrid, and that was quite the journey, where we scaled from 100 to over 300 in a really short amount of time. And since then, I've been working at a fantastic little health tech called Helios X. But in the last couple of weeks, I've been lucky enough to join Ivan, which is a big open source data platform. We're nearly about 500 people scattered across 10 offices around the world. And I've joined them hopefully to make them a brilliant hiring organization. They're brilliant in many other ways, but we can do better on the hiring. So we'll see how that goes.
Fantastic. And we're going to steal those little tips from you today. So I'm so excited to have both of you join us today. And I have to say, I have worked with Ed and Jarrad previously, as both has mentioned. One time was not enough with Jarrad. I had to do it twice. And not because I didn't want to work with Ed again. It's just that I decided I'm going to join VC and give it a try. So
it'll happen again one day, Juby. We'll get that together.
It might not be work, it's collaboration, just like what we're doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Jarrad, speaking of transition from start to build stage, what typically unfolds if hiring, and you have so many experiences, I'm sure you have lots of examples, what typically unfolds if hiring processes lack consistency or repeatability in your experience?
Well, there's a couple of ways to look at this. Obviously, the outcome of that is a very patchy skill set in the team and the people that you're bringing in. Just as important and frustrating is kind of the other side of that, which is, especially when you have a large team hiring, the friction and relationships that can kind of bring a real us and them mentality. So my last couple of roles, I've kind of walked into this kind of situation of an amazing talent team, an amazing engineering leadership team, but they're not really talking to each other. And so you not only get the bad output of inconsistent people skills, values, and all kinds of things at the outcome at the end of the process, but you also have this kind of friction that happens at the start. On top of that, you have a bad candidate experience, especially with consistency. Some candidates can get X and some candidates can get Y, and I think that reflects in all things, especially like Glassdoor review scores, and generally in the marketplace. I mean, it's a small market out there, and people talk, as we all do as well, right? And they, as soon as your company gets mentioned, I had a really bad experience there. It matters, and it definitely matters in trying to hire the best talents, because people do listen to that.
I really love what you talk about, what is the outcome, what's the impact, not just for the business, the skill set that you have, the candidates, but also, I don't know if we're thinking, this is really interesting for me as well. It's really interesting. Do we think about, whilst hiring itself, the conflict between the talent team as well as whether it's tech team or other business function? Do you see that in your role as you always go in? And
I think it's a huge thing, because I think the key word with that is trust. I think as soon as a talent team doesn't make it their mission to build trust with their stakeholders, or loses that trust in some way, I think it's very difficult then for somebody like Jarrad, whose job is reliant on building a strong team around him, to put that into the hands of the talent team. And I think the relationship there, we've talked about it in the past, Juby, but the role of HR has evolved to become a much more of a business partner role. The role of talent is lagging behind with that. They're not quite there. They're still recruiters who are servicing the needs of the business with a gap between, and in planting the recruiters in with the business, in with somebody like Jarrad, and saying, right, you tell me what your business need is, you tell me what your problems are, and how we can solve that together through people, is a really key transition that talent hasn't quite made. I've seen it work well in some places, but generally it's not quite there today.
do you see the difference when it is a start stage, when you're, still, what I call creative chaos, still a bit scrappy, to now your product market fit, you now need to build an operating system that is more consistent? Does it show more, the pain point in that?
I think one of the interesting transitions is getting a company getting their first recruiter in is a really big moment, because suddenly they're giving the power to this person who's on day one. They don't know the history, the sweat that's gone into getting the company to there. And I think a lot of the time what founders and early leadership teams are doing with that hire is saying, we want to keep hiring the way we do, We just want you to facilitate it. You know, it's almost an administrative role. And it's a very difficult challenge for that person to then push back and say, I can make this better, but it involves change and it involves taking away what you've done in the past. And I think that's very difficult. So it's always a moment of chaos, really, in terms of what do we now stand for as a hiring organization, and how do we go about doing that job.
And Jarrad, when you talk about, when you experience the inconsistency and, lack of repeatability, what are some of the examples that you see that manifests?
So I think in terms of examples within the organization, you mean?
For example, could it be different hiring manager may ask different question, therefore they're evaluating different thing, or the process in engineering, I don't know, is 7 steps and then sales is 3.
Yeah, I think that matters across the company to have some level of consistency, and Ed was really good at bringing this in at InfoGrid. But what I liked about that is it gave enough room for engineering to kind of slot into that in their own way. So I definitely recommend that top-down approach. But again, what you ultimately get from that is a fractured organization of skills and capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And so, especially if you already have a career grid, maybe some people are using it one way, maybe some people aren't, that have had that before. So that can happen. And that's all these things are kind of long feedback loops that are going to bite you over and over again in the future. When you have this big team of people with different expectations that were brought in under different circumstances, that's just going to keep being a common problem that you'll get as leaders over the course of, number of years probably. So I think that's the biggest one for me. It's not just a problem now, it's that long ongoing problem of the entire life cycle of that employee. If the consistency and how they've been brought in is very different.
So for our audience, Jarrad referenced career grid. It could be your job ladder, career framework, career map, job architecture, whichever name that you use, which align the expectation of the roles that you're hiring across the organization and what you should expect from whether it's your level 3A or F1, whichever naming you call it.
Yeah, and I think that's only one way to get consistency. And I think in the start phase, you don't need such an enormous version of that, because usually there's only one hiring manager hiring a group of engineers, and everything in that person's head is probably good enough at the moment to get going, and probably good enough for the organization as well. So yeah, I think that's just one way of getting consistency from start to build, I think.
So what you're saying is, on the flip side, what can we see? So what we are trying to help our audience see is, what do you see are the symptoms when things are inconsistent? So one of it is inconsistent expectation.
Yes, inconsistent employee expectation. So I was brought in to do this. This is what I was told here during this process. And that can be so much as I was told I was going in this team, which can be one thing, but it can also be I was told I was coming in as a senior, but now I'm a mid. It can be that I was told that I'd be promoted. You do promotions every 3 months, so I was told a promotion would be easy. These are all, completely inconsistent ways of doing something that kind of pop up if you're not controlling the process at least at a very high level.
So Ed, I noticed you were about to say something there as well. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to agree with Jarrad, but I think the key is that for any business process, a consistent process is a strong one. And when you get a weak hiring process, you'll see that immediately through the candidate and to an extent the stakeholder experience. But the candidate will experience delays because as a business you're not quite sure what to do next, who's going to interview, how are we going to do this. You end up repeating questions, going after the same evidence on interviews because you're going in there and asking people to talk through their CVs time and time again because there's no clarity about what is it this interview stands for, what is the evidence that we're looking for today. And what you get from that, all good business decisions hopefully are made with good data. Now, if you get to the end of a hiring process with inconsistent data, you're going to make inconsistent decisions about who to hire, and that's going to kick the business through productivity problems, attrition problems that we've all seen before in various places further down the line. And I think when startups move so quickly, it's such a fine line between making a good hire that adds value for at least the next couple of phases, hopefully, and grows with the company, to somebody who doesn't even add value, in the immediate term. And that's a really difficult thing to deal with. So it's so valuable to get this right beforehand.
I'm going to summarize, I think, what I hear from both of you, which is really valuable for our audience. Number one is I believe you say it will slow down the speed to hiring. And we know that, when we start to hire, we have a need for the individual. We are going to be to have inconsistent experience for the candidates as well as different managers in different team, and therefore causing confusion, which would maybe lead back again to the slowdown in hiring. And if candidates, as Jarrad said, poor feedback on Glassdoor is harder for you to attract, so it goes back to again slowdown in hiring. But also really important what you're talking about is, are you hiring the right talent? Are you selecting the right fit of talent for your team consistently across the business? And making that, in order to make that decision, you also need data, and inconsistent data doesn't help you to make consistent decision. So, which is really interesting. So, Ed, I have a question for you. So, as the director of talent, what is your key strategy when you're at this stage, when startup is transitioning from start to build? You're making that conscious decision, right? We now need to be more consistent. We need to create process that's more repeatable. What are some of the conscious choices or that strategy that you choose to actively prioritize on, and probably if things that you might choose not to do anymore?
I think perhaps the starting point during these transitions, and yes, it's from start to build, but actually later transitions, it's just as valuable. And we've already touched on a little bit, but it's that definition as a company. What does good look like for us going forward? And you have to purposely ignore what's worked so far, even if it's been good, because as the business changes, those needs will change, and sticking with let's call it the hiring bar that you've had so far won't necessarily get you to the place you need to go next. So I think that calibration and agreement at the top of this is what we now look for. This is what the right kind of person is for us, and that could be about the type of problems that you're now going to be facing into have changed. The type of company culture that you've had and the values that you stand by might have evolved differently. And it means that at the front door, at the interview process, you need to apply those structures there. And I think, a good example actually that I'll bring in, if Jarrad doesn't mind, is about 20 months ago, Jarrad and I were on our second conversation. We started a week apart at Infogrid. And I simply asked him the question, what does a good engineer look like here in 12 months' time? Not today, not who's your best, but in 12 months' time, what are the kind of people that will be solving the right problems? And it was a completely different answer to if I'd said, who's the best? Who do we repeat? What's the best spec that we've got today? And we rebuilt not only the job description for engineers, but actually the interview process came after that, the hiring bar came after that. Just from one simple question. It's important people go in and challenge. The company's changed, the company's moved forward. Do we understand what that means for what we're looking for? So I think for me, that's the most important thing to do regularly. And as a talent director or an HR leader or even a CEO, it's really important to consciously ask that question and test whether things have changed. I think you asked as well what not to do. And I think something, particularly at this phase of a company, that we see time and time again is once you've got that structure, that framework, that hiring bar defined, make no exceptions. We've all seen, that transition into a bigger company culture. We've created the processes and somebody gets their mate in. Somebody has a good hunch at an early stage and skips the process. There's always the odd person that sneaks through the back. So often that's a disastrous thing to do. And I think once you've created that hiring bar, the best thing you can do with it is to champion it throughout the company from top to bottom, through the recruiters, through the hiring managers, through the CEO, and defend it with your life, really, and make sure that if there's any bias in that process, that you step out and you let the company make the right decision rather than an individual do that. So I'm always a big fan of sort of stamping that kind of behavior out.
I really love what you said also at the beginning, where what not to do is to carry the past, what works to what may or may not work today. And that is really, really interesting. Okay, I have actually a question. I'm going to ask Jarrad this one, and Ed, feel free to jump in. Many times when we reach the build stage, because the past stage is all about being ad hoc, being flexible, testing out things, and when we move into the build stage, sometimes we might have founders or business startup leaders that go, no, we're losing our culture, and we cannot, the process is there, and it's stifling, whatever it is stifling. How have you encountered this? And if you have, what are some of the ways to help to bring people along the journey that we are moving into the next phase of growth, and this is what's going to help us to scale?
Yeah, I think in hyperscale mode, there's always a fear, especially from the founder who is very emotionally connected to the company. Not always, but a lot of the time it's emotionally connected to the company, that the culture is going to be lost. I think, I won't name company names specifically, but usually in my experience, the good conversation to have with the founder is, well, can you explain the culture now? Like, what are the just the basics of what you wouldn't want to lose here? Because usually at this early stage, especially in the start, like just before build, there's probably a very less deliberate culture. It's an organic culture, right? And you kind of can derive a culture from that, but it's not something that's written down that everyone adheres to, that everybody understands what to do and how not to behave, etc. So I think quantifying that, I think, is the first thing. So there's an expectation thing there, because even if I go, okay, I think you mean this, and then go higher to that, like there still could be something there. I think there's always a place for culture or in the interview process somewhere. So how does that align with the founder's view? And more importantly to that, and to Ed's point on alignment, how do you get all the leaders aligned on that? Because you could still have fracturing off of different expectations in terms of the people you're bringing in. Everybody, due to their functional specialities, especially engineering, will bring in a different culture because there will be different types of people from lots of different types of background compared to marketing or compared to commercial. So there's that to take into consideration as well. So you can't promise the world, but you need the basics aligned from the top as to what that is. Otherwise, it's just not going to work.
I love that you touch upon, basics aligned, because I don't believe that this is the step and you shall follow the step at every department, etc. But if we were to agree on fundamental principle and, align on that, and then you have the chance to add the flavor, like you say, engineering might have slightly different flavor to marketing or to finance. I'm going to ask both of you, are there any I would say three principles that you would say, if you can agree on these three principles across, the organization, chances are will increase the probability of agreement when we start putting in, process and structure and things like that into the hiring?
Well, the biggest force multiplier is if you have the wrong leaders that aren't aligned to that culture, because they are by definition force multipliers. So that one of the first things I always look for in an organization is, do I have the right leadership team? Are these people that are currently here, are they going to be force multipliers for ultimately the culture management style of how we want to work, and not just how one person wants to work? So I think that's definitely the biggest thing for me. So first principle, I know I sound like a broken record, but most things are leadership problems. Like, they just are. And so usually it's a lack of leadership. It's a lack of directness. It always comes back to, do you have the right leader in place all the way up the chain? So do you have the right leader in place is definitely the first principle in that. Secondly, there's a cultural piece there in terms of, I've been in many places before that's kind of, who have been there from the start, that's in a transition to build. There's a pushback that happens. Sometimes it's a direct pushback. I'm not doing that. This is way overblown. Why are we doing this for? Or sometimes it's a bit more subtle, which is sometimes a bit more dangerous, kind of just ignoring it, right? That kind of stuff happens as well. Especially engineering managers. I've had this kind of thing with performance management before. When a new process comes in, they kind of, just go about their business as if nothing's really changed. So I think in that, it's about getting the entire organization on the same page that we are in transition. Mm-hmm. And I had a boss at Zoopla who did this really well. So the first, every single month, he would get everybody together and he would say, just so everybody understands, we are in transition. This is what's happening. This is evolving. We are evolving, and here's what's going on. You'd be surprised, how many times in my past career, when someone doesn't say that deliberately and get everybody on the same page, how often it just kind of, there's this invisible pushback and tension that just doesn't need to exist in the organization that's moving in that direction.
So if I can play back, what you're saying is a few principles, if we use it as guiding the alignment. One is to make sure you have the right leaders in place, particularly when it comes to hiring. Are they ready? Do they have the skill to do that? The second one is communication, not just communication, communicate consistently to create awareness.
Correct.
Perfect. And Ed, what about for you?
Yeah, I think what we're almost touching on here is the transition from the organic company culture that Jarrad mentioned to a values-driven culture. You know, taking that organic culture and writing it down and saying, look, this is what we stand for. This is how we move forward in the right direction. From a hiring point of view, I always try and push those values directly into the talent team, into the recruiters themselves to drive through with the business. So, you know, it's very difficult for, you know, a junior, a mid-level talent acquisition person to go up to a Jarrad and say, hey, you have to do this. This is the way we're working. But when it becomes a company thing, you know, when it becomes, hey, Jarrad, this is how this company hires. This is how we set up our hiring because it's part of our values, you know, and that could be, most companies want to have a very customer driven environment. You know, they put the customer first and it's all about delighting the customer. And they forget that quite often their customers are candidates, and candidates are often VIP customers. Not only do they pay for the products, but they want to help build it as well. And yet they don't get treated in the same way. So to put the values first in the hiring is always really important. And the other piece is to understand the communication of what those business priorities are. You know, you're always on a mission in a startup. You're always going for that next milestone, and hiring will be the thing that gets you there. So for the recruiters, I don't know if talent people always sort of connect what they're doing with the business mission and how important that is, but also for those hiring managers to understand, you know, the effort, the rigmarole that goes into getting somebody across the line and hired and into their new role is huge, and they have to play their part in that. So putting that business priority at the forefront of why are we doing this? Why are we making changes? Why are we spending your time, my time, getting people through the process? And I think those two things are probably pretty important.
I love that both of you said the same thing and tackling it there in your department separately, which is when there is a change, is creating that awareness and repeating it, not just in the talent team, but also in the business team itself. So both are always on the same page.
Sure. I think just to add to that, and this is a line for sure I probably used with you, Juby, but talent, you know, I think traditionally talent was something you threw a job spec at them and complained until the person arrived, you know. I think what talent needs to be going forward is an enablement team. You know, yes, we will do a lot of the legwork. Yes, we will guide the company on how best to do this. But essentially what they're there to do is create a really good hiring organization. And that involves every single person in the business, you know, whether that's because they're interviewing, because they greet a candidate with a coffee at reception, whether they write a blog post for the employer brand. It's a 100% of the company effort to get people across the board efficiently, and talent should just be the engine for that. So as soon as there's a disconnect in terms of the priority of where hiring sits, in terms of the values that drive, you know, why we hire, who we hire, and how we do it, I think that's where problems, you know, can scale pretty quickly.
That's really interesting. Two pictures pop in my mind. One I'm going to ask Jarrad, and one I'm going to ask you, Ed. So Jarrad, I kid you not, in one of my company, and engineering, when you start to grow, engineering is a team that hire quite regularly, quite frequently, and lots of interviews. And I have a head of engineering ask me if could we hire an engineer just to do the interview so that the rest of the engineers do not need to do the interview because it's taking time away from them to build the product. What are your thoughts?
I haven't heard that one before. Were they being serious, or was that a joke?
No, it's true. I got only asked one time, but I was like,
yeah, I think it's funny, isn't it? Because I'm having to delve into memories of a year ago when the world was very different, right? We're in a different context now, when hyperscaling isn't really a thing anymore. Scaling is a thing still for various places, but hyperscaling the way we used to do it is not really a thing. So that was probably the biggest problem felt all the way down, and myself included, right? I think that when things changed last year, the biggest thing I had more of was time. Like, I'm not in interviews, you know, I'm not in 8 interviews this week. Wow, okay, I can spend my time doing other things. So I think it's, I've worked in a lot of places that manage that very differently. There's a lot of spreadsheets that I'm sure have my mark on it flying around somewhere in the ether in order to organize these things. But you need to be wary of people's time, and you need to have some very clear guidelines in place as to you can't take more than X number of hours for this person's time. Which, if I recall, Ed, in the early days, I think we had something relatively like that to make sure that we weren't overloading certain people. that kind of brings up other problems as to we've got this great influx of people, but we've actually run out of people because this constraint's in place now, which I think is a good problem to have. Then you kind of you can solve that as a separate issue, but putting that constraint in is really important to safeguard time. And again, I think a lot of the conversations from that I had over and over again was just reiterating the importance of this in terms of this is our number one priority right now. Here's all the things that we want to do that we can't do at the moment. Here's all the things we want to fix that we can't fix at the moment. So this has to be number one. And so, I'd ask anybody to please drop what you're doing if you get a tap on the shoulder from the talent team.
So what you're saying is, yes, of course, are you saying, no, we should not hire someone separate to the team to do the hiring?
No,
Actually,
no, we shouldn't do that. Yeah.
It's important because you're building your own team, right? You're
100%. Exactly that.
And it goes back to that collective responsibility. It shouldn't be one person's job to hire for this organization. It's everyone's. And I won't mention the company name, but a few years ago, I know of a company that hired a contract software engineer, pretty expensive, to sit there and do the hiring manager reviews of CVs all day. So he didn't even interview the candidates, but he sat there and looked at CVs and said yes, no, and he did it for about 6 weeks. And I think he wanted to leave the workplace forever after that. It was the most mundane job he'd ever done, and it was a really interesting lesson for me, because it was, as talent teams were evolving from this very service-led team to actually a team that worked with engineering, and all it took was a talent manager to come into that and say, this is crazy. The only thing that hasn't happened is the communication of what good looks like into the team. And they didn't trust the recruiters to make the decisions. And a few weeks into this person's management role, the team was suddenly given the trust, because he'd educated and calibrated between the stakeholders and the team. And eventually it was a much simpler process. So I think, if you need to do something like that, I think there's probably something missing. I'm not sure.
Well, then the opposite direction for you, Ed, is, so we have from we don't want to do the recruitment to I want to do all the interviews. And so sometimes, as startup grow from your start to build phase, your founders often personally interview every candidate, typically at the values or culture interview stage of the hiring process. Is it advisable for founders to continue this practice during the build stage?
No. Is the short answer. But look, I think it's a really interesting one, and I think most founders will always struggle to give up that I suppose reassurance that they've met candidates and they've put their own stamp of approval on each one. But the reality is, particularly as you start scaling faster, there's more candidates, there's more hires happening. Time becomes the major issue, and time is so valuable for a founder and a CEO.
But what if the founder go, this is the most important thing I can do to build the org, and therefore I am going to spend 15 hours a week. Is this a good idea?
For sure, and it's a conversation we've all had with people. But I think the key is it comes back to that word trust, and it comes back to the framework and the trust in the process and the hiring bar. And for talent people out there, I would always urge them not to get into a battle of trying to take that away, but actually give them something better to allow them to step away. And I think, what that founder is probably holding on to is, I know what the hiring bar is in my head, and it's not scalable, because I've interviewed everybody that's joined this company so far. But to take that away and build a hiring bar, build a process that raises the bar without the founder as part of that. So the founder, if they want to opt in and have these conversations, absolutely fine. But give them an opportunity to step away with trust that actually what will happen in their absence is something better. And that takes, clarity in terms of what good looks like. It takes relentless calibration, perhaps interview training. And the key thing it will take is data. You have to present something that shows that actually what you have done is created a better bar, a more consistent bar than they could do single-handedly. And that will then allow them to have the trust to step away.
If you don't mind sharing, so conceptually that's really clear. If you don't mind sharing a very tangible example for our founders, if you're listening to these, or our talent partners that is, facing this challenge, what is a very concrete example from beginning to the end that you might face with a founder that go, I can't let this go yet. I don't know if I can trust the team to hire.
So to take an example, the founders, what they will all often do is the culture check, they call it. They will be that last barrier to somebody getting an offer at the company, and they will have probably a fairly rushed conversation with them. They will dive into how they approach things at a relatively high level, and they will say, yes, I like them, no, I don't. But actually, when you get to this stage of scaling the culture, it being more defined, perhaps introducing these values that your company is finding success with, and you want to scale those values for the next generation of employees. Something that I've done before, and I'm a huge fan of the Amazon Bar Raiser program. I take it and I change it. I'm not a fan of some aspects of it, but finding people in your business that have great track record of hiring, they run good interviews, they can control hiring decisions, and asking those people to opt in to do a values-driven interview. So, for instance, they will sit there, they will run competency-based interviews with all candidates of all levels. So, hey, if you want to come and work for this company, we need to know that this is the right environment for you. You're going to thrive here, you're going to prosper, you're going to be able to keep up with our pace and our way of working. And they can dig deep, much deeper than a founder probably has time for, on how that person has worked in the past and whether that will be transferable to the environment you've created. And those people will then run the hiring decision. So it's not about them saying yes or no to the hire, but it's about them getting the group of interviewers together and saying, what is the evidence that we have? What are the data points that we have that this person would be a good hire? And they're the ones that then hold the hiring bar. If you can collect a small group of these people so that they're not doing everyone, ideally they would be doing a couple of people a week during growth phases. It's small enough that it's really well calibrated. You've got a really good feedback loop going on in terms of how well the interview process is working. But you've also got somebody there that can say, I'm concerned. There's a risk, and the risk is too big for us today, and we can say no to this. And it's much better to make a mistake by not hiring a good person than it is by hiring somebody who's not going to work out 6 months later.
Right, that's really tangible. I'm guessing that's one step, which is when this small group of, if you like, culture champion, interview team, whatever name it is, before there's a step in between founders doing all the interview, founders and them shadowing together, then handing off the reign to do it independently.
Exactly. Yeah.
Talk about this when we move from start to build. What are some of the repeatable recruitment strategy that we can apply, and also what are some of the guiding principle that can bring alignment to this change? Next, we want to look at process and systems. So from your expertise in laying down the foundation at the build stage to create consistency in hiring at scale, when you evaluate the recruitment process across an entire organization, what are the top 3 actions you would typically take to establish consistency across multiple departments in the organization?
Just defining it to 3 is probably difficult, but I'll try and give you some fairly broad ones. And I think that the first one is that when you look at the interview processes from department to department, they should look as similar as possible for me, because when you're hiring somebody, or when I'm hiring somebody at least, there's 3 main questions I answer or want to answer during that interview process. The first is, will this person operate at the right breadth and depth in their role? So you're hiring a senior engineer. What makes them a senior? Are they an engineer that's used to dealing with problems of relative complexity and size that they're going to face here? Do they have the skill set to solve the problems we're facing into? And again, this is something that evolves all the time with a company. You're constantly taking on hopefully bigger problems and need people with different or more complex skill sets as you evolve. And once you've established those 2 parts, should they do it here? Like, is this the right place for them to come and grow their career? Will they add value to the way we work, to our environment and things, beyond just the skills that they bring? So I think, of course, the questions you ask technically between an engineer and a marketeer are going to differ, but actually it's the same premise for every role in the company from there. And then once you've established that, the second action is to calibrate, like thoroughly calibrate with everybody that's involved in the interviewing process. So from the hiring manager to the more senior stakeholders that understand what's going on the ground, interviewers, hopefully, it's beyond the hiring manager and you're having evidence gathered by other people around the business and of course from the talent and from the people partner space. Everybody needs to understand what it is that we're looking for and how we go about doing that. And then probably the third one, I think would be really interesting for founders to get more involved in and for stakeholders to see a little bit more of is mapping the process. A really thorough process map that shows you, you do this for your customers quite often. You say, what is the experience of the customer? What are the various touch points? What are we doing to control the emotions of the customer? And you can do this on one map to feature, how it is for the stakeholders, for the hiring managers, for the talent partners, for the ops people, and most importantly, obviously, for the candidate. And quite often when I go into a place for the first time, I will start mapping these things out. And it's incredibly apparent where bottlenecks are, where people are dropping out of processes because, they're affected quite emotionally about, maybe the feedback they're getting, the time they're having to commit and things like this. So create a really clear map. I'm a huge fan of Miro. Throw a load of post-it notes on there and say, these are our boxes and arrows, and this is how it's working today. Where can we find inefficiencies and easy wins to make this whole thing better?
I like how you're comparing it to a customer journey and you're looking at the candidate journey, not just how are they experiencing it, but also all the other actors within that play. And I'm guessing at the end of the day, you want the conversion in the pipeline. And the right
you want the conversion in the pipeline. You want to understand the data flow. You don't want candidates / customers sitting there waiting around, not knowing what's happening with their, with their application or their order. I was speaking to a CEO a few years ago of a company that had not the best hiring experience for candidates, but they're an incredibly customer-focused organization. And I said to him, if you knew about a team that was directly impacting 100,000 customers a year negatively, you would do something about that team pretty quickly. And yet, because we call them candidates, there's much less worry about how they're treated. And I think as soon as you can apply that customer obsession into your candidates as well, I think people see things pretty differently.
I love it. And Jarrad, I'm going to segue a little bit. You have worked with Ed, and I'm guessing you have gone through the, evaluating if the role is right for today and for the future versus the past. You have done calibration so that, people are hiring at the same quality and standard and bar that has been set. And how do you ensure that the journey as smooth as possible, not just for the candidate, but also the frustration for your manager, right? I'm waiting for this dev. When are they coming? Could you tell us a little bit about your experience? How did it benefit you in terms of then delivery as a tech team and at the end of the day connect to the whole business ecosystem of the organization?
Well, I think what Ed's described, it's the foundations that enables you to have a fine-tuned or well-oiled machine. And I think that's what's needed here. It's a lot of people don't like it, but it's a sales funnel, right? Like you're talking about. So in order to have a successful sales funnel, you need a good process, and you almost need to think about it in the abstract. And so the fundamentals are there in order for that process to be in place on top of it. And so at that point, that process for me is, people coming in, it's constant conversations at that point because you can see it in front of you. So who have we got in the pipeline now? Who's blocked? Who do we move along? What does this person need? What decisions need to be made at this point or at this point or at this point? In every company I've been in since Supla, what I found incredibly useful is a daily stand-up of hiring, where you sit down sometimes in front of a Trello board. In Supla, we actually made our own called Rello, which was Workable and Rello and Trello kind of mixed together. But you need something in front of you that you can all use to push people through this process. So not only for a great experience, but obviously to get people in the door quicker. That's keeping that feedback loop small, however you do it, is the most important thing if you want a well-oiled machine. And what you're talking about there, Ed, is just that before you can have that well-oiled machine, that foundation needs to be there of, we're looking for this breadth of people, we're looking for these skills, and ultimately should they be here? And then all the process around that. So that's, yeah.
I love your Rello board. Is that how you call it?
It was amazing. And some of our amazing devs there just knocked it together with the Workable API. But it was a combination of Trello and Workable, basically. But Rello because WRE, yeah, anyway.
We have actually, in the HR community, if you like, there's a adoption of more product management, agile way of working. And this is a very tangible example of visualizing. So sorry to say this, not workflow, but the flow of experience of, candidates going through and visualizing that always. And I know you do that in product and tech as well, visualizing the flow and where breakdown happens. So that's really helpful. And Jarrad, within engineering team, from your past experience, you come in and you're building that foundation. What are some of the legacy processes you might see from start stage that you want to, highlight to our audience to be aware of that sometimes might need to be eliminated?
Just in terms of hiring, or just generally in scaling from start to build?
Hiring. We're focusing on hiring today.
Yeah, so I think the first thing I always look at, and I did this at InfoGrid and all my previous roles as well, is I want to see the data, right? So you don't need to see it visualized necessarily, but I'd like to understand the data. So it's a deep understanding of the flow that we go through and who drops out where, how many are in the top of funnel, how many ultimately get out at the end. Like that's the first thing to look for. And that from there will tell you if it's correct. So actually, yeah, because sometimes it's not correct. Getting that correct is the first thing that you should do above everything else. So if you're working with bad data, then you're never going to get where you need to go to. So fixing the data and then using the data to ultimately spot dysfunction is the fundamentals of what to do. So and in building that kind of that process. So the daily stand-up usually comes because there is a long feedback loop in decision making, and that's a way to solve that. Visualizing it for the whole team is a way to solve the problem of, well, where's this person? What are they doing? Who's looking after this? Who's doing what? So if you can visualize all of that in one place, ultimately you fix that dysfunction. So by having the data as a starting point and understanding the ultimate goals, you can then flush out each of those dysfunctions one after the other. Consistency might be another one where you might have inconsistency in decision making at the end, or I've had lots of bottlenecks at decision making at the end. We had that at InfoGrid when I first got there. There was kind of a like, who has authority basically for this amount of money for this person, or not quite sure what's going on. So that's another dysfunction, and the data will say that. It will say right here at the end, people seem to languish. Why is that? So it's about systematically picking apart accurate data to always be looking for dysfunction.
Fantastic, which nicely segue into Ed. Out of curiosity, yeah, I know you love data. Actually, I'm so sorry I don't have your data duck. Audience, a random one. Ed has a data duck mascot because that's how much he loves data. What would, if you have top few data metrics that you would love to have more, but let's say to start with, what are some of the top few that you will make sure that talent is establishing? That's the first one. The second one, as Jarrad said, garbage in, garbage out. So you need to have the right data, and how do you ensure you have the right data?
Yeah, let's start with that second point, if that's okay, because I think that's so critical. And I think as companies move from start to build, that will be something that probably they're lacking a little bit, unless they've had an ATS very early on and have been using it correctly, which is always the bigger challenge. That data wouldn't be there, but it's never too early to start understanding how these processes are working and where you can make changes. And without that data, it's very difficult to do that. And that's about accountability. That's about ownership. That's about understanding the long-term repercussions of what will happen if the owners of that data, so often the recruiters, but also interviewers, hiring managers, how to write good interview notes, how to use the system and keep everything contained in the system. I had conversations in the last couple of years with so many people about sending feedback through Slack or over email and data flying around the place, and it doesn't help anybody. So I think that's the first thing, is to understand the power of whatever system you're using, whatever ATS you're using, and to ensure you're optimizing what you're going to be able to get out of it in 6 or 12 months. It's always a slightly delayed result. Sorry, Juby, I forgot the first part of the question now.
That's okay. That's really, really good. So number one is to understand, talent team understand the power of the ATS that you have. Yeah. And in terms of designing the process, you also understand how the data start to be collected. And you can design all the system and process you want if nobody uses it. So the accountability comes in, and people understanding why you're doing it, not because I have to follow process, because there is a process. We are doing this in the system rather than in Slack, email, voice note, guilty, because you're trying to achieve something at the end of the day that is then circle back to what Jarrad talks about, the experience, the flow, the improvement in decision making, and everything else.
Yeah.
The next question I have for you is, what if you have a few matrix
Yeah.
prioritize to have in place as you continuously build this? What are the few?
Of course. So when I think recruitment is one of those areas where there is an endless amount of data points. I mean, you can measure just about everything, some things better than others. And what a lot of companies do is elevate so much data, but don't read the trends. They don't analyze what it means for the company and what it means for the candidate or the experience. For me, I try and keep it as simple as possible. So there's 3 layers, which might not sound so simple, but the resulting layer is productivity. So what is the overall output from a talent team perspective that we're able to create? So, a simple measurement for that is hires per recruiter per quarter. There's loads of people who have very strong opinions about what the standards should be, but the reality is you need to make a decision for your own company. Even for within the company, different recruiters in different areas will have different numbers that they'll want to be targeting. A layer above that is process efficiency. So it doesn't matter how many candidates you get into a pipeline. If that pipeline doesn't work well, then there's no point. So it's about understanding how long does it take for a job to be open before you know it's likely to be closed. How long does the correct candidate take to get into the process? It's something we often call time to source. How long is the time to hire? So that correct candidate that ends up getting the job, spend in the process, time in various stages and things like that. So you can measure the efficiency of the processes that you're running. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's the key area where recruiters often lose control. It's huge dependencies on interviewer availability, hiring manager reaction times, getting the job description right at the beginning, understanding, is this what we're definitely looking for? Because the worst thing in the world for a recruiter is to get to a final or an offer and for the hiring manager to say, actually, I think what we need is a lead instead of a senior. We should start again. And then the final layer, the top layer, is inputs. So what is it that we're inputting into that funnel? And this is where, if you have that process refined and working, what you want to do is add as much quality as you can into that. So it's about understanding, are your recruiters at the top of your funnel putting everybody in and creating blocks and taking your company time up by interviewing the wrong people? Or are they able to target the right person? So are they being effective? And are they getting the right volume of good candidates to be able to make a decision from? So it's no good, obviously, saying, hey, I found one really great candidate. Let's pray to the recruitment gods that they're still there at the end of the process. But equally, what you don't want to do is have 100 first interviews for a single job. So it's understanding what is the right balance and how do we go and find that. So then when you get a little bit more mature, you're starting to analyze things like quality of source and starting to do things like, A/B testing of reach out messages to make sure you're being as effective as possible.
I think there's the reason I said just hiring before GB, I think there's a metric we always overlook, which I've been guilty of many times, which is who's leaving. Like what is the actual success rate of the process? So if you have 20% of people leaving in the first 3 months, then something's wrong. So that's another metric, kind of past the hiring process, but into actually doing the day job. That I think we often overlook. I think it's ad hoc done, but I think I think it's a good one to keep an eye on. So as exit interviews are happening or exits are happening, maybe hirings and firings, maybe something's wrong there. Maybe we hire the wrong people.
I think that's such a key, and it's a big topic, Jarrad, at the moment in the talent world, and it's the metric quality of hire. How do you? And there's a lot of arguments at the moment about how you measure that, but a really simple framework, a really simple formula where talent and hopefully HR teams, people partners work really closely together is understanding, look, we interviewed this person 6 months ago. For one reason or another, they're now exiting the business. What is it that we could have identified in the interview process? And that feedback loop is one that's missed. You have such a disconnect between exits and hires, but bringing that feedback loop straight back into the talent team so they can understand, hey, this is a trend we're seeing, and this is how we can help solve that problem.
I absolutely love it. And just to highlight, many times hiring is finding the right match. Is sometimes where candidate leave, candidate drop out, etc. It's not because they're terrible talent. It's just that if it's not the right fit, and if it's not the right fit, we want to know as soon as possible on both sides, so that both sides can self-select. Jarrad, I love that that's the question I wanted to ask you as well. What other metrics do you care about as a hiring manager or hiring leader? Is there anything
Yeah,
to what Ed says?
I think Ed summed it up really well. I don't think I'd add anything. I think the things that I would always look at in the data is where people are dropping off and how long people are in process for, generally. So they're the specifics of kind of what to react to. So that, and are there swaths of people leaving because we got it wrong somewhere in the process?
So usually when we have process, we have the metrics, we know what we're looking for. And the next question is, how do you choose the right tool? Or do you have a few things that you look for in selecting a talent tool? Or do you even have recommendation of any that you have used that you go, yeah, I'll use that again?
I think there's a lot out there. There are so many recruitment tools. 99% of them offer to solve your problems with AI, and I've never seen many recruitment problems be solved with AI yet. Look, I think there's a reason there's a lot of different talent tools. It's because they will solve different problems, and to get one that's fit for purpose for your company is the right thing to do. I don't think. I'm a huge fan of greenhouse reporting, but I'd rather be a recruiter using Lever. And there's great, marketplaces for sourcing. HackerJob is somebody that's I do a lot of work with them, and they're building some really interesting stuff to change candidate experience. But hey, there's other marketplaces out there that might be better. So I think, look, it's worth doing some due diligence about what the value you can get out of these tools. I think the big problem with tooling sometimes in recruitment is people buy features they're never going to use. It sounds fantastic, but actually really ask yourself, how do we optimize our own needs through the next tool that we buy in? And I tend to find in companies when you struggle to hire, recruitment leaders, HR leaders, often their reaction is to throw money at the problem. Get a new tool, go and get a new marketplace, go and spend more on LinkedIn. There's only one big set of candidates out there, right? And if you're not optimizing the tools you've already got, you're probably not going to optimize the next one. So it's much more about sitting down with your talent team and often your hiring manager team and saying, this is how we can get more out of this product, much more than adding the next product onto the list. And I think that's a big one. It's something I often ask my, recruiters. They come to me and they say, hey, I'd love to spend some money on this. I'd love to get access to that. And I often ask, and it's probably quite an annoying answer for them, but have you completed LinkedIn? How have you been working with that? We're already spending X amount of money. Show me your pipeline, show me your messages, so show me your posts and what you're doing there. And there's always more to be done, I think.
It resonates a lot. Same for people too, or HR too. I want to know very clearly what we're trying to achieve before we find a tool that can help us solve the problem, rather than they have this feature, may solve or may not solve problems that we may or may not have. I wonder, Jarrad, for engineering, is it the same as well? The same
100%
applies for the tools.
Yeah. I wish it wasn't, but yeah, we love a good tool in engineering. And I feel like I've spent a lot of my career having the same conversation, which is, well, before we get a new tool in, what are you trying to achieve? Why can't you do it on a spreadsheet? And if that goes beyond a spreadsheet, then it's okay. Well, then we'll talk. But let's think about the tools that we have and think about the ultimate outcomes we want. But yeah, it's very common.
Now that we talk about tool, now let's look at talent team and talent team's capability and structure. Do you see a change in structure from moving from start to build stage in a talent team?
I think it goes back to that point of you need to move from a recruiter that's a facilitator of long-standing processes or lack of processes, perhaps, to somebody that can drive best practice. And I think that's the big difference. I think in terms of a structure, in terms of an org chart, I think again it's got to be fit for purpose, and you've got to decide what's right for you. I think something companies tend to do quite early and probably too early is bringing things like sources who are very specialist at just going out there and building huge pipelines. The reality is I don't think you need that super early, and a good recruiter who can own a space, that can sit with their stakeholders, understand the business, understand what the hiring bar is, and hold that hiring bar is a really valuable thing, and they should be able to do a huge bulk of the workload there. So to be much more 360 in terms of their approach. I think the key will be to find a recruiter who genuinely cares about the hiring bar, you know, to work with them to define what that means for the individual company, to understand from them how they think they can build a process and build a set of principles to do that, and then they'll hold on to it for dear life. You know, they'll protect it and they'll see it as their own area of ownership, to say they'll feel empowered enough to say, I feel uncomfortable with this hire. I feel like our hiring bar is under risk, and I would like to call it. And I think that's a big step for recruiters who have been, you know, I think many of the better recruiters have come through agency world. They've got that hunger and desire and that work ethic that you're trained with there, but they come into an internal world and feel like everybody's their client, and they're not. They're a colleague, you know, and they have to see a Jarrad as somebody that they're working together with to hire the right people, and they have, you know, a big say in who comes into the business, and they have to feel responsible as well for saying, actually, I don't think this is a great hire. I think we should pull back. And I think once you've got that with a recruiter, you feel like perhaps that's the structure you want. It doesn't really matter how they look on an org chart.
Love it. And Jarrad, on the flip side, as the leader experiencing the change in the talent way of working, if you like, through this transition, what are the 3 things you would like to see from your talent partner? Is it very similar to what Ed says, or do you have anything to add on?
I think a true partner, I think a lot of the things you just mentioned, Ed, is enables true partnership. So that autonomy, and that's somebody who can run with something. I don't think you can have true partnership without that. Otherwise, you just have a whole bunch of people kind of doing lots of busy work, and you're having to jump around a lot. And that's hard to get that partnering relationship, because you're more partnering with a scattergun group, large group of people then. So I think definitely that's who do I go to talk about this problem? Or who does everybody know to come to me to talk about this? Like, there's a clear roles and responsibilities piece that needs to exist in the team. That's it's definitely another problem that I've had to solve in my previous roles of poorly timed decisions. So that's definitely having that autonomy, that person to go to who just owns it, who they're messaging you at 9 at night because they're excited about a candidate. They're actually really bought into kind of driving the company forward. Like, that's what I love to see, that kind of dedication.
Fantastic.
Not that everyone has to work till 9 p.m, but
Good save there, Jarrad. So a quick recap. We look at how hiring practices evolve from the start to build stage. We've broken it down into 6 foundational elements. We look at the strategy, the guiding principle, process, structure, capabilities, and data, and dive into each of the areas to provide our audience with valuable insights and how to practically evolve their recruitment practices from start to build stage. So thank you, Ed and Jarrad, for your insights from both the business and talent perspective. As we conclude, I would like to ask you one final question to help our audience avoid common pitfalls in hiring that may occur during the transition from the start to build stage. So Ed, would you like to kickstart and share maybe the top 3 mistakes that startups should be cautious of during this journey?
So I think the key things that you will find has been happening and definitely needs to stop are probably that single dependency, whether it's a founder or a key person that's been responsible for hiring. It needs to be scaled out from individuals, because at some point they will fall over from having that weight on their shoulders of having to do everything. And then, having said that, as you push this out, to prevent the individual silos, to stop Jarrad building his own hiring bar, which is different from the head of sales, the head of marketing, the head of people, or whatever it might be. I think that is a really risky area, because once those silos have been built and things are happening in different ways across different areas, as those departments grow, it's going to be very difficult to pull them back. So this is the key time, I think, to say, this is how we hire as an organization. This is why it needs to be consistent, and then you can build and evolve from there. So those are the two big ones I would probably fix on.
That's a really, really important one. Thank you, Ed. Jarrad, what about for you?
Yeah, I mean, I just add to Ed's ones because I think they were spot on. But I'd also add, keep the talent bar high. I think, or keep the talent bar to appropriate and don't shift on it. So there's definitely a want to move faster, and by moving faster, you will inevitably drop quality, and you'll drop some of the things you need on the look for if you're not deliberately keeping that bar high. And so I think sometimes I've seen decisions get made because we just need someone in, and that can typically happen at the build phase, where you're just scrambling a little bit because things are on fire. They're usually on fire, right? So I definitely think about that. And then we've kind of discussed it already. It's making a really deliberate effort to not just go and do a lot of this stuff in isolation, but to make a really deliberate choice to say we are moving from here to here. Here is what this process is going to be. Here are the people that are going to be involved now. This is a change. It's treat it as a little bit of a revolution as opposed to just a slight evolution, because I think going from start to build deserves that. It deserves a different mindset. And I think as leaders, we should look for opportunities to bring that into the organization, and hiring is a great one.
I love it. I love the ending with this is not a little evolution. This is a revolution, because it's a different step. Fantastic. Thank you for the great advice, both. And I want to also ask if, anyone listening to this podcast and they go, I would really love to talk to Ed or Jarrad, how could they connect with you after listening to this podcast, or how can they reach you?
As a recruiter, I live in LinkedIn, so I'm easily searchable there, and I will do my best to get back to anybody that wants to chat or to sound check some ideas.
I'm going to hazard a guess for Jarrad. It will be Laksa Mania, Laksa, CNN.
100%. Yes, any Laksa place around London, I'm sure to be in one of them at any point. But yeah, same as that. I unfortunately spend a lot of my time in LinkedIn as a job seeker and as an employee. I have very mixed emotions about LinkedIn. I'm sure we all do, but yes, that is the best place to reach me.
I love the two expression. Ed is like LinkedIn. Jarrad is like begrudgingly LinkedIn. So if you have enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe to our Notion's newsletter to stay updated on the next installment of Start, Build, Scale, People Edition, People and Organization Edition. Don't forget to share this podcast as well with your friends and colleagues. Thank you so much again, Ed and Jarrad.